In this video, I'm going to talk about some of the basic setup techniques you need for, let's say, a first 3D print, or if you are having issues getting decent quality prints out of your FDM style printers. Now, I'm using a MakerBot Replicator 2. They've been out for a while, they're pretty well figured out, but most of the things I talk about today are going to be applicable to almost any of the low budget FDM printers. Now, the goal of this video is I want to help everyone get a good quality first print. Is it going to be perfect? No, but I want to get you started in being able to make parts you can use. So I want to talk about printer specs first. And for me, my printer is a PLA printer. It uses 1.75 millimeter PLA, and it uses a 0.4 millimeter nozzle. And that's important because that's what your software uses to calculate how much filament to extrude. So you'll see when you buy filament, they'll give you a diameter. Oftentimes they'll also give you a recommended print temperature. Now, so this is actually a different brand. This isn't MakerBot filament, it's eSun, and I've had great luck with their filament. But you'll notice it's saying it's 1.75 millimeter. And if you were to measure this with calipers, you'd find it's a lot closer to 1.71 millimeters. So initially, an issue I was having when extruding with this filament is I was getting poor adhesion between layers because it wasn't extruding enough filament. And the prints looked fine, but when you went to use them, let's say if I printed a GoPro skeleton case, the case was really brittle seeming, and it would break. And so the way to fix that is you want to measure the filament diameter in a bunch of different places and calculate the average. And in most cases, you'll find it's slightly different than 1.75 millimeters. Now, the best recommendation I have if you're going to be using something like a flexible filament or a filament that's made to look and feel like metal is to go to the page where you bought it or look up online some recommended specs on it. Now, the flexible filament I have is very similar to MakerBot's flexible filament, and I've had great luck printing with the MakerBot settings. The next thing I want to talk about is your print bed. So some important aspects of your print bed are what material is it? Is it heated, non-heated? Is it level? So I've had great luck using blue painter's tape, and I got the 3 or 4 inch roll. Just wide strips of tape, and you can see it's getting pretty torn up. However, it doesn't seem to affect the first layer of my print too much, but this is about ready to be changed. Alright, and leveling your build plate. I would say this is probably one of the most important steps you need to take before you start a print. And this is something I do every time just because I get frustrated when my prints fail, or I just feel guilty wasting filament. So different printers handle it in different ways. My MakerBot printer uses a bit of a dated technique, but it works alright. It has these screws you can loosen and tighten to change the print bed's plane, and it's got prompts on the screen. Essentially, the goal here is you need about a little less than a business card's thickness everywhere between the nozzle and the print bed. So however your printer handles that, that's your goal, is you want to be able to just barely be able to fit a business card between the tip of the nozzle and the print bed. And keep in mind here, make sure there's no filament hanging off your nozzle or anything obstructing it. So what I like to do is heat the nozzle up and pull the filament out the top and wipe it down real quick with a rag to just make sure there's nothing protruding from the end of the nozzle. So if you don't have a business card handy, something else I found to work perfectly is a normal piece of printer paper just folded in half, and you should have about this amount of friction. It should be tight, but not touching the table. Now the next tip I'd like to pass along is if you're having jamming issues with your filament, so like let's say in the middle of a print, your filament jams and your extruder can't push any more filament out. Something that's really helped me is to put a drop of canola oil on the end of a fresh cut piece of filament and then load that into your extruder. Something else I just like to point out too is when I am changing filaments or removing my filament, I like to heat it up, but before it gets fully up to temperature, maybe somewhere around like 200 degrees Celsius, I like to pull the filament out of the extruder, and I find that it pulls a lot more filament out. If it heats it up, it kind of, I don't know, strings, and you get like a bunch of filament left in the nozzle, where if you can pull it out before it's fully hot, the filament's not completely melted, and you pull out the whole chunk and you can cut off the old filament. So this is kind of what I was talking about, is, I don't know if you can see, but the end of the filament's it's a big glob, and that's the part I pulled out of the nozzle. So if you let it get all the way up to temperature, that glob might actually stay in the nozzle. It might be part of your jamming issue. Now, finally, when you're loading in a new filament, the thing to check for is you want to make sure that it's extruding out in a fine line. So we're just going to watch as it pulls it through, and we should see a steady stream of filament, no twisting or twirling or anything, and I like to let it go for a while just to make sure it purges out any air that might be trapped in the nozzle. Alright guys, that's the conclusion of this first video. For my next video, I'm going to talk about some troubleshooting techniques for during the print, what to look for, things like stringing, things like jams, and what settings you might be able to adjust in your software to help these prints come out better. So go ahead and check out my next video if you're having those types of issues. Thanks for watching.